Canada, America's quiet, polite northern neighbor, has just thrown down the gauntlet and declared its own Declaration of Independence from the American war machine. In a stunning, almost unbelievable strategic pivot, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has just unleashed a radical new defense policy that signals a dramatic, high-stakes break from decades of dependency on the United States. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar spending surge, a shocking review of the F-35 fighter jet deal, and a bold new pivot to European and domestic military hardware. Why the sudden rebellion? Years of simmering fury over U.S. trade wars, political bullying, and the feeling that Canada has been treated less like a partner and more like a doormat have finally boiled over. Is this the dawn of a new assertive Canada, a middle power no longer content to be on the menu? Or is this a reckless, desperate gamble that could leave the nation isolated and vulnerable in an increasingly dangerous world? The Carney Doctrine, a new vision for a Canada that's done being pushed around. What's really going on here is a fundamental, almost philosophical shift in how Canada sees itself and its place in the world. Behind the scenes, the new government under Prime Minister Mark Carney is reportedly operating under what's being dubbed the Carney Doctrine. And the thing is, its core idea is a direct shot at Washington. It asserts that the United States no longer holds the same overwhelming influence in international affairs as it once did. Carney has characterized the current global environment as a hinge moment, a chaotic period of flux much like the end of World War II, a time that demands decisive, proactive action from nations like Canada. You see, the Prime Minister has reportedly been blunt in private meetings, hammering home the stark reality that in this new era, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. This isn't just a catchy phrase. It signals a seismic move towards a sovereignty-first, self-reliant security posture. It's a clean break from the historically cautious, almost timid Canadian foreign policy, especially concerning its giant neighbor to the south. The doctrine implies that while old alliances like NATO are still important, they absolutely must be backed up by a strengthened capacity for independent Canadian action and a diverse web of new partnerships. The perceived transactional, almost mercenary nature of modern international relations, particularly with the US, has apparently forced Canada to reassess its vulnerabilities and build a more resilient security architecture for itself. So what was the final straw? Why is Canada now deliberately trying to reduce its profound, almost total reliance on United States defense suppliers? A dependency where a staggering 75% of defense capital spending traditionally flows south. It's a toxic cocktail of strategic anxieties and raw, burning frustrations. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been shockingly direct in his critique of what he calls Washington's tendency to monetize its hegemony. A fancy way of saying America charges its allies for market access, while simultaneously reducing its own contributions to collective security. Trying to imagine such a situation? It's like paying for a premium security service only to find the guard is never on duty and is constantly sending you extra bills. This perception has shattered trust and fueled a desperate desire for Canadian autonomy. And just when you thought it couldn't get weirder, let's not forget the political rhetoric from the US, including past suggestions that Canada should just become the 51st state, and the ongoing brutal trade tensions and tariffs. These actions haven't just irritated Canadian officials. They have infuriated the Canadian public and starkly highlighted the economic dangers of being so deeply tied to a single, unpredictable partner. If your primary security guarantor is also acting like your primary economic adversary, the strategic imperative to break that singular dependence becomes a matter of national survival. What nobody talks about is that the US approach, possibly intended to bully allies into spending more, may be having the exact opposite effect. It's forcing them to build their own capabilities and find new friends, potentially diluting American influence for decades to come. Talk is cheap, but money talks, and Canada is now screaming. A cornerstone of this revamped defense posture is its ironclad commitment to finally meet and potentially exceed the long-standing NATO defense spending target.
Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
The Carney government has announced its intention to hit the NATO guideline of spending 2% of its gross domestic product on the military by the 2025-26 fiscal year. This isn't just significant, it's a massive acceleration, achieving the target a full 5 years earlier than previously planned. And to prove they're not bluffing, an immediate injection of $9 billion to $9.3 billion Canadian dollars in additional defense funding has been allocated for the current fiscal year. This new financial reality stands in stark, almost embarrassing contrast to Canada's historical spending, which according to NATO's own figures was wallowing around 1.37% to 1.45% of GDP in 2024, placing Canada near the bottom of the pack among allies. But Prime Minister Carney has framed this spending surge not just as checking a box for NATO, but as a fundamental domestic necessity. Our goal is to protect Canadians, not to satisfy NATO accountants, he declared in a powerful statement. This isn't just about appeasing allies anymore. This is about Canada finally taking its own defense seriously. And here's the crazy part. This cash injection is the crucial fuel for the entire rebellion, enabling the ambitious plan to ditch U.S. suppliers, forge new European partnerships, and kickstart a domestic defense industry. But it gets even deeper. The April 2024 Defense Policy Update, titled Our North Strong and Free, while foundational, was slammed by critics for being too slow, with most of the spending back-ended until after the 2025 election. That same policy also acknowledged that the Canadian Armed Forces were in a personnel crisis, a death spiral of being unable to attract new members, but initially offered no concrete solutions. Carney's new, aggressive spending timeline seems to be a direct rebuke to that earlier, more timid approach, a clear signal that the government understands that a hollow force, no matter how well equipped on paper, cannot defend a nation. This is where it gets wild. A huge part of Canada's strategic pivot involves a deliberate, almost aggressive outreach to European defense partners. Ottawa is actively engaging with the European Union's €150 billion rearmament initiative and has become involved in permanent structured cooperation projects designed to bolster European military mobility and logistics. This isn't just about buying stuff. It's about embedding Canada in alternative security networks, giving it more leverage and reducing its vulnerability to pressure from Washington. And the truth nobody expected is how brutally this pivot is playing out. The decision by the Carney government to put Canada's planned acquisition of 88 US-led F-35 Lightning II fighter jets under a thorough top-to-bottom review is a direct public slap in the face to the American defense establishment. Currently, Canada's firm commitment is only for the first 16 jets. Why the sudden cold feet? The costs have exploded, with original estimates of $19 billion ballooning to a staggering $27.7 billion. And Canada's own Auditor General warning it could climb by at least another $5.5 billion. Add to that significant project delays and a critical lack of pilots, technicians, and ready infrastructure, and the F-35 deal starts to look like a financial black hole. Carney himself has explicitly linked the review to the ongoing trade disputes with the U.S., signaling that Canada will no longer be taken for granted. And then, out of nowhere, right when things seemed locked in, Canada began actively, publicly exploring European alternatives, with Sweden's advanced Saab Gripen fighter jet being specifically named as a top contender. This changes everything. Choosing a European jet would be the ultimate declaration of diversification, fundamentally reshaping Canada's aerospace procurement and industrial partnerships for a generation. The naval modernization plan is just as audacious. Canada is moving forward with the construction of 15 new state-of-the-art warships, the River-class destroyer project. But what nobody talks about is the design. It's based on the British BAE Systems Type 26 frigate, a platform also chosen by the UK and Australia. Another clear signal of a pivot to non-US partnerships for a flagship military program. Add to that a planned reinvestment in new submarines to replace Canada's aging and barely functional fleet, and the message is clear. Canada is rebuilding its navy with a distinctly European flavor. And if that wasn't enough, it gets even deeper in the Arctic. The cornerstone of Canada's new Arctic vigilance strategy is a massive $6 billion Arctic over-the-horizon radar system. But here's the crazy part. This critical piece of NORAD modernization is being pursued in partnership with Australia, not the US. Canada is deliberately leveraging Australian expertise to build its own surveillance capability, another stunning move to diversify its technological dependencies away from Washington. To top it all off, Canada is investing $2.49 billion in a fleet of 11 MQ-9B Sky Guardian long-range armed drones, a significant leap in its independent surveillance and strike capabilities. This isn't just modernizing, it's a systematic, calculated decoupling from decades of U.S. military hardware dominance. The industrial imperative. What's really going on behind the scenes is a plan to not just buy new toys, but to build them. Central to this entire strategy is the creation of a new defense procurement agency, a direct response to decades of criticism that Canada's existing system is a slow, bureaucratic nightmare. This new agency is tasked with streamlining acquisitions and, crucially, building up a robust domestic defense industry. This is where it gets really interesting. Complementing the procurement agency is the establishment of the Borealis Technology Research Hub. Borealis is designed to be Canada's own Skunk Works, a center for developing homegrown capabilities in the most critical future technologies: cyber defense, artificial intelligence, and Arctic surveillance. This is Canada's bet on its own technological sovereignty. The government is backing this up with $2.1 to $3 billion in new funding specifically to strengthen this domestic industry. They're using their industrial and technological benefits, or ITB policy, as a weapon, requiring that any company winning a major defense contract must reinvest $1 in Canada for every dollar they earn. This policy will be applied aggressively to all new procurements, from naval ships to drones, ensuring that this massive new defense spending builds Canadian jobs, fosters Canadian innovation, and grows Canadian companies, not just American ones. Canada is at a historic crossroads. The Carney Doctrine and the sweeping defense realignment it has unleashed represent the most significant pivot in Canadian foreign and defense policy in over a generation. It's a high-stakes, high-risk gamble, a direct response to a world in turmoil and a relationship with the United States that has become dangerously unpredictable. By committing to the 2% NATO spending target, overhauling its broken procurement system, and aggressively diversifying its defense partnerships away from the U.S. towards Europe and its own domestic industry, Canada is making a bold declaration. It will no longer be a passive client state. It is seeking to become a more capable, more sovereign, and more influential middle power, ready to defend its own interests in a world where it can no longer take its primary alliance for granted. Canada has thrown down the gauntlet, ditching its quiet demeanor for a bold, risky, and incredibly expensive defense revolution. By snubbing the F-35, embracing European partners, and pouring billions into a homegrown war machine, Ottawa is sending a clear message to Washington. The days of dependency are over. But is this a masterstroke of sovereignty or a catastrophic miscalculation that will leave Canada isolated and broke? Has Canada just paved its path to becoming a true global power? Or has it just picked a fight it can't possibly win? Tell us what you think below.